All right, Dr. Lane?
Yeah.
Feeling refreshed, I hope.
Yeah, much better, thank you.
Good, thank you. Yes, Ms. Grange.
Yes, thank you. So we were on the subject of the BBA certificate.
And where do you want me to turn to?
Just to set the scene for a moment. So in your original report, you looked briefly at this, and then in Appendix O, we now have a much more detailed explanation as to why you don't think that 2008 BBA certificate is valid for the cassette system. What I want to do is just pull up the certificate itself and just look at some key points, because it is very detailed what you've done in Appendix O, and I just want to get the headline points across. So this is the BBA certificate from 2008.
Yeah.
And if we look at the first page, can we possibly make it a little bit bigger, or is that... Yes, that's helpful. And you note, I think, that the heading is headed Rainabond Architectural Wall Cladding Panels. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And then I want to look at page 3 of this certificate to start with, which is... and it's the figure 1, the diagram at the bottom.
Yeah.
So we touched on this earlier, and I think this is a helpful diagram, I hope, to try and explain the difference between a riveted system and a cassette system.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you just help the chairman to, just by reference to these two drawings, explain what the difference is between the two?
Yeah. So a riveted system and a cassette system are both made with a flat panel. And the difference is to do with the end shape of the flat panel. So for a riveted system, as you can see here on the left, the flat panel is left as is, as such. It's cut into pieces and it's riveted onto a support structure. The cassette system has another piece of work done to the flat panel. It's shaped into, it's like the cover of that box there. It's shaped into a piece like that, and they can have all different depths, or depths of the box top. And on the Arconic website, it gives very detailed information on standard sizings for shaping the cassettes. And then the cassettes can be fixed in different ways to a building. They can be hung, they can be screwed, they can be riveted.
It looks as though Arconic contemplate that in either of the systems there will be rails fitted to the facade of the building to carry the panels.
That's correct.
You either rivet the panel to the flange of the rail,
Yes.
or you hang the cassette into which what the panels been used to make onto bolts themselves carried in those
Exactly,
channels.
exactly. So in the channel on the right, you'll see there's another bracket with a bolt in it. And in this picture, the cassette system has a little, the thing on the edge, on the box top, can slot in onto that bolt.
Yes, thank you, that's very useful.
But, sorry.
No, carry on.
So, but a cassette is about its shape.
Yes.
So you're shaping the flat panel.
And just to be clear, and in very general terms, it's important, isn't it, to know the distinction between the riveted and the cassette in terms of their ability to resist the spread of fire, their testing.
Yeah. Yes. So what I've learnt because of looking at the test evidence provided in this inquiry is that when the flat panel is in a cassette shape and hung as a cassette is, it performs differently under fire compared to a flat panel which is riveted.
And what are the differences?
A much poorer performance in fire. And actually it's probably worth me mentioning something. I did hear Professor Bisbee yesterday refer to the French tests. We have very detailed test reports, reaction to fire test reports. And I thought it worth mentioning that the riveted system, as you know, has been classified in those tests done in France. But when they tested the cassette shape, they had to stop the test because there was such a high level of heating behind the cassette occurred in the test. And when you put the two photos, the riveted system photo and the cassette system photo side by side, they almost look identical, but one gets a classification and the other cannot get a classification, the cassette, because it burnt so much in that test.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So just coming back to this certificate, and I just want to briefly establish the key reasons why you've rejected it as a valid test. So one of the points you make is that the certificate is potentially misleading and that it purports to relate to all Rainabond architectural wall cladding panels, of which you find that there are 14 types. Is that right?
Yeah, so I've used the word factually incorrect, not misleading in my report.
Yeah.
And it says on the front cover architectural wall cladding panels, but for example, you know, I haven't seen any cassette that has got the performance this agreement certificate is for. So because the most important thing about the certificate is the performance it refers to, which on the front, which is class naught.
Yes.
Okay.
And so what you've found is that the certificate relates to 3 types of panels, but in fact only one of those panels referred to in the certificate is class naught. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And that is a Rainabond FR ACM metallic grey PVDF panel. Is that correct?
There is relevant test evidence for that fire retardant core panel.
Yeah. I was going to ask you what FR stands for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so I think it stands for fire retardant.
Yeah.
And it's referring to the core of the panel. But FR isn't something that's defined anywhere as such. So I assume it means some fire retardants have been added to the core, and so the product is being called or named a fire retardant product.
Yeah, and just to be absolutely clear, is that the same kind of panel that we have with the PE core at Grenfell Tower?
My understanding of the core at Grenfell is that it is PE. They call it a standard core.
So not the FR core.
It is not the FR core.
Yeah. And the BBA have confirmed in response to questions from the inquiry that the certificate was based on 4 product test reports.
Yeah, so it'd be very useful if they could come up on the screen.
I wasn't going to take you to all of those test
that's
reports.
Fine. Yeah.
But the point I wanted to ask you was that the certificate itself doesn't actually identify the test reports which underpin it, does it? It doesn't actually identify on the face of the certificate what the test reports are, does it?
No, it does not.
No, you've had to ask for those and we've had to get those separately.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Do you think it should have identified those test reports?
As a designer myself, or someone who has to sign off on buildings myself, which I've done a lot in the past, I very much wish now it had, and I certainly think that such certificates should now come with the relevant test evidence so one can establish for oneself if that certificate is applicable to the construction form you're taking responsibility for.
Yeah. So for those key reasons, but for also the detailed reasons you've set out in Appendix O, you have rejected that test certificate
so
as valid for Grenfell Tower.
Yeah, so at Grenfell Tower specifically, we have a cassette system, and I have seen no test evidence where a cassette system performs to the requirements of approved document B. We have a standard core, and I have no test evidence to support a standard core panel with the performances set out in diagram 40 of approved document B.
Yeah, and as we established earlier, just before the lunch break, the certificates you've seen suggest that the Rainabond PE 55 cassette system is European Class E. That's what you said before the break. Yes.
Yeah, so the test reports I've read show me that.
Yeah. I want to move on from this now, unless there's anything more you wanted to say about it specifically.
No.
So as to the manner in which the Rainabond 55 PE was fixed, and the exposed PE filler and core, can we look at BLAS 608 at page 59, figure 8.65. Yeah, so I wanted to turn this up because we looked at quite a lot of exposed edges yesterday with Professor Bisbee, exposed edges in relation to the spandrels. But here we're looking at the column rain screen panels, is that correct? That's what the diagram seems to suggest.
Yeah.
Yeah. And is it right what you're drawing attention to here is the number of exposed PE core edges of those panels?
Yes.
And I think we discussed earlier, is your evidence that there are considerable risks posed by this particular exposed PE in the installation? Because the PE is exposed. It's just a simple
So
point.
PE poses a risk,
Yeah.
whether it's exposed or not.
Yeah.
But obviously, I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over again, but
Sorry if you are.
these small details are important in the early stages of a fire when there's a small, a small fire. When you're into, a really large flame front, I cannot say that something like an exposed core is truly significant at that point relative to anything else.
Yeah.
Okay, but yes, at Grenfell Tower there were very many exposed lines of polyethylene.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to turn to talk about mountings and fixings.
Yeah.
And is it right that you also consider that the Rainabond 55 PE certificates for the cassette system, which do exist, wouldn't be valid anyway because your view is that the test condition should accurately replicate the end-use condition? Is that correct?
Okay, so can we just break that down?
Yeah.
So I think, did you say the test certificates?
I said that the Rainabond 55 PE certificates for the cassette system would not be valid because your view is that the test condition must accurately replicate the end-use condition.
So, yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you've noted, one of the things you've noted is that the panel shapes and the fixing method, which was used at Grenfell, varies from the standard archonic details. Is that correct?
Okay, so a separate point.
Yeah.
Okay, is that the cassette, the box top, if you will, at Grenfell Tower is particularly deep. And at the moment, I can only look at the Arconic website about this. It gives certain depths, and I have them, it's in my report somewhere if we want to get into the detail. And the depth of return at Grenfell Tower is much deeper than those.
Yeah. So they're not the standard. But is that about the fixing method? What I was specifically asking about was the fixing method from the panels. You say it varies from the standard archonic details.
No. So I think we're talking across purposes here. So that's what I'm trying to be very clear about.
Yeah.
The depth of return is different.
Yeah.
The fixing difference is the cassette is hung on at Grenfell Tower.
And is that different from the standard archonic details?
No, our Arconic have a hung detail, but they do appear to have some kind of screw or rivet as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just ask, is the depth of return, in your view, likely to be significant?
Well, yes, I think it is actually, because I don't know if you can remember earlier when we were talking about the PIR and that, this kind of containment function. So the cover of the box, if you will, is acting like, it's like a container.
Right.
So if it's relatively deep, you're heating up a very nice space. Yeah. And I think the CTSTB test reports are very interesting to compare for that reason too. That when you have this shape, the test has to be stopped because the heating effects are so different so early.
Yeah.
So it seems to be significant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And what I'm getting at is that, can you just explain why what might appear to be like insignificant differences, in fact, are potentially very important when it comes to fire safety, so that they might invalidate a certificate?
Yeah,
I think
okay.
you highlight a number of parts of, I think, approved document B,
Yes.
which stress that these differences
Yes,
are
okay.
important when you're looking at test evidence. Is
Okay,
that
I
correct?
understand what you mean now.
Yes.
So I think in different parts of my report, so for doors, for the cladding, the importance is the word relevant. What you have to provide is relevant test evidence. And I think there's all sorts of places where it's explained that you can have a material with all different performance rankings, okay? It'd be the same material, but have a totally different reaction to fire classification as a function of what's behind it and how it's attached to the material behind it. And so it's the system or the assembly is really important.
Yeah.
So as a designer, I cannot choose a material and ignore the construction context that I'm going to place that material in,
Yeah.
okay? Because it changes its fire performance, either better or worse. It works both ways.
Can we just look at one example of that? You stress that this is emphasised in a number of pieces of guidance.
Yeah.
Let's look at approved document B itself.
Okay, if that can
Appendix
go
A.
up on the
So
screen,
yeah,
please.
of course.
Yeah.
CLG 50224 at 1119. So the bit I want to take you to is, first of all, at the bottom of that first column, note 1. There's that very last bit of text under note 1, the bottom. So I think, so there we see it says different forms of construction can present different problems and opportunities for the provision of structural fire protection. That's one aspect you draw attention to, is that correct?
Yes, that's structural fire protection. Yeah.
And then note 2 is perhaps more relevant to what we were just discussing. At the top column, that's it, on the next page. So that states, any test evidence used to substantiate the fire resistance rating of a construction should be carefully checked to ensure it demonstrates compliance that is adequate and applicable to the intended use. And then it says this, small differences in detail, such as fixing methods, joints, dimensions, and the introduction of insulation materials may significantly affect the fire rating. Is that an example of where designers are being warned about what you were just discussing?
Yeah, and that's in the context of fire resistance. So now we're talking doors, floors, and walls, okay?
Yeah. Okay.
But the same principle applies for reaction to fire if you
Okay,
go into
that's
part
helpful.
10 of BS 476. Anyway,
Yeah.
so everywhere it's clear that the context of the product you're selecting has to be understood.
Yes.
And that's why the test evidence has to be relevant.
Yes.
And relevant means to how it's going to be installed in that
Yes.
building.
Yes, I think for the note you refer to BS 476 part 10 as
Yes.
well in paragraph F1.1.8 of
Yes.
your report. We don't need to go to that, but
Okay.
and you say that's making the point even more firmly about test evidence.
Yeah, but that's specifically relating to reaction to fire.
Yeah.
And reaction to fire is the performance relevant to the cladding at Grenfell Tower. So it's more relevant than this note here.
Yeah. Insulation. Can we move to the insulation then? Can we just orientate ourselves again and just work out what we're talking about? BLA 50495 is an image of the insulation being installed on spandrel panels.
Yeah, so what figure is that in my report?
I think it's a standalone photograph.
Yeah.
Which has particularly clearly,
Yeah.
you can see the guys actually installing the spandrel insulation. Is that correct?
They're actually taking it off.
Oh, sorry,
sorry
I'm
to be
sorry.
annoying.
I'm
Yeah, no,
sorry.
they're actually taking it off.
Fair
Anyway,
enough.
yes.
Either
But
way.
there are men there and they are touching the insulation. Yes. Okay. I think maybe, yeah. Yeah.
And that's one of the spandrel panels.
Yeah.
And they were you had two of those,
Yes,
is that right?
that's
outside,
correct.
Behind the spandrels at 80 millimetres in thickness each, is that correct?
That's correct.
And the key point is that the insulation is required to be of limited combustibility under approved document B. So that's A2 or better.
That's correct.
And is your conclusion that none of it was?
Correct.
Yeah. So let's just explore that a little bit. The Celotex RS5000 insulation, which was installed on the spandrel panels where we were just looking, and the column panels.
Yeah.
The test reports that you've reviewed indicate that that achieves European Class D.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Yeah. And only those tests were done after the Grenfell fire.
Yes. Yeah. And you've considered all of that relevant test evidence in your Appendix E.
Yes.
Yes, and aside from... So there was a BS 8414 test report carried out by the BRE in August 2014,
Yes.
which was subsequently withdrawn. We'll come to that in
Yeah.
a moment. In any event, you say you would reject that because the configuration of that test had a range screen system with a Marley Eternit cementitious board. Is that right? Used
That's
as the
correct.
insulation. So
That's correct.
you've rejected that. You also rejected a desktop...
Do you want to say something?
So the Eternit board is that external surface.
Yes.
Instead of the panel, it is the insulation is separate.
Yes, so it's not so it's not the same as what was at
Absolutely not
Grenfell
the
Tower.
same.
So you can reject that in any event.
Correct.
You also say in Appendix E that you rejected a desktop assessment produced by Exover Warrington Fire in May 2015 because none of the range screen cladding types were representative of the ACP panels at Grenfell.
That's correct. And Exova also warned the reader about choosing a material with aluminium
Yes.
in their report.
And you also note that BS 8414 test report by the BRE in August 2014 was subsequently withdrawn by Celotex.
That's correct.
That's correct. And you've noted in your report discrepancies between what's reported to have been tested and what in fact was tested. Is that correct?
Yes,
And is that a topic that you think should be investigated further in phase 2?
very much so.
Now, we touched on this earlier. You note in your report that the Celotex brochure requires the insulation boards to have a self-adhesive aluminium rain screen foil tape over the joints of the insulation board. Do you interpret that as meaning that all of the exposed edges of the insulation foam should have had that foil tape on them?
Yeah. I don't know how, I wouldn't know how to interpret it in the sense, to me, a face is different to a joint, and they mention joint. I think it would be useful if it said and the facings or any exposed edges, if that's what they required a designer to contemplate.
Yeah.
But at that time, it just said joints.
Can we just look...
I'm sorry, can I ask, is there any reason why one would wish to tape the joints but not tape the cut edge?
We're going to come to a photograph, actually.
Oh.
that shows
all right,
this.
sorry, I'm getting nervous.
No. This photograph might help with that question.
Okay.
So if we go to figure 8.37, BLAS 608 at page 35. And if we can zoom in, thank you. So is it right that what we're seeing there, we're looking at the insulation on the columns on the right-hand side, yes?
Yeah.
Is it right that we can see that for that tape in between some of the...
Yes, you can. Yes, we can.
Yeah, and to answer the chairman's question, do you
Yeah.
think there might be a reason why they've done that in those locations?
I have no idea why they say to just tape joints and not tape exposed edges. And I don't even know if they want the joints taped for fire reasons or not. So that's a level of detailing, I can't advise you on. So what we need to know is why the tape is needed, if it's relevant to fire or not, when Celotex give that advice. So it would be best if they explain that, if that's okay.
Yeah. But what we can see is that they did have some kind of foil tape on
Yes.
site but they seem to have been using it in that way, but not, as we can see, to seal
on the cut edges, exactly. Yeah. So the tape. So when you have two cut edges together and you form a joint, they seem to want to seal it. And if you have a plain cut edge not up against another piece of Celotex board, you don't put any tape there.
Yeah. It's also believed that Kingspan Cooltherm K15 was used.
Yes.
On the building. Professor Bisbee's estimated that might account for less than 7% of the total insulation used on the building.
Yes.
Do you agree?
Yeah,
broadly?
it was a relatively small amount, yes.
Yeah. And is it right that achieved national class naught, but that's not a method of determining limited combustibility, is that right?
Yeah, so class naught is to do with the surface. Yeah. It's not an insulation test. At
paragraph 8.9.4 of your report, you've referred to the fact that in order to affix these insulation panels to the building, they used stakes, 180mm stakes.
Yeah.
Do you know, and you may not, because I'm not sure it's something we've focused on, whether the type and the length of fixing was used consistently?
Oh, I don't know that. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. And do we know the brand or? No,
I don't. I don't actually know anything about them.
Yeah,
so again, could be a nice piece of information to be given.
Okay.
Yeah.
The alloy glaze window infill panels, we've already discussed these. They're XPS, extruded polystyrene, and you say in your report that we think they made up about 13% of the surface between levels 4 to 23 of Grenfell Tower. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And can you just clarify, I think you said it earlier, are these properly to be characterised as sandwich panels?
Yes, insulation core panels is the phrase used in the approved document.
And I just wanted you again to be clear, what is the purpose of those panels?
To insulate the building.
Yeah.
Insulate that part of the building, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. And you say in your report that no formal test evidence for those panels has been disclosed to the inquiry. Is that correct?
That's correct,
yeah. But you say from some publicly available data sheets you think that might have been Class E. Is that right?
Yeah, well, the website where the product is actually very clear. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, and you note that the manufacturer's Panel Systems Limited, they state that they don't achieve a national class naught on their website. Yeah. When we're thinking about these kind of panels, these sandwich panels, these XPS panels, is it relevant to consider what's said in Appendix F of ADB about insulating court panels?
Yes, I think so, because I think the approved document B is explicit about that type of panel.
Could we just look at that?
Yeah.
So it's CLG 50224 at page 147. So I think what we get is paragraph 3 in Appendix F says this, or part of it says, when compared with other types of construction techniques, these panels therefore comprise a unique combination of problems for firefighters, including hidden fire spread within panels, within thermoplastic core, production of large quantities of black toxic smoke, loss of structural integrity of panel, rapid fire leading to flashover.
Yeah.
Is that the warning that you were just referring to?
Yes, because some buildings are formed almost entirely out of these panels for other reasons to do with hygiene and other things. And so there's been firefighter deaths and some other quite serious problems with them for, I think it's nearly 20 years or so now. Yeah. Thank you.
Cavity barriers.
Yeah.
I now want to come to cavity barriers. I think we'll cover this topic and then probably break, if you're comfortable with that.
Oh yes, yeah.
Now we looked earlier at approved document B and where those are required if you're following that guidance.
Yeah.
Can we just look at that again? In fact, it's in your report, BLAS 5011 page 69 and figure 11.22, which is the relevant extract. So if we can zoom in on that diagram. So just to remind ourselves, these cavity barriers are required to close around openings in the external wall at the junction of fire-resisting elements. Is that correct?
Yes.
So again, they're quite hard to see, but could you just point them out just so we're absolutely clear?
So they're the little, on this diagram, they're the little light grey things at the windows, at the floors.
Yeah,
and also where a compartment wall intersects with the external wall too. And at the top of the wall to close off the cavity up here.
yes, I wanted you to emphasise that. Yeah. And the cavity barriers that were installed on site were Siderise RH25 open state cavity barriers, is that right?
That's correct.
Can we just look at a picture of those? Can we go to BLAS 608, page 42, at figure 8.46? So perhaps starting with the bottom picture. So this is a picture from the Siderise product literature. And can you just explain to us, for those that aren't familiar with this, what an open state cavity barrier is?
Okay. So can we go back to the ADB picture? Is that too, is it too, is that okay?
I'm sure we can.
Yeah. So in this diagram, if you just look at one of the cavity barriers either at the floor line or at the window, the concept is it fills the space formed between the internal and external wall construction. And it provides a fire-resisting barrier fully between those two pieces of material, okay? So it's a full fill of the cavity in that location.
And that's what's meant by open state?
No, so that's a cavity barrier.
Yeah.
So now, when you go to an open state cavity barrier, the idea is that in a normal condition, it doesn't fill the cavity, it leaves a gap. And if we want to go to the Siderise picture now, it leaves a gap for day-to-day reasons, okay? And when heat approaches the cavity barrier, in behind that black layer is something called an intumescent. And an intumescent changes shape under heat and can move, it like expands and so fills the gap that's there day to day. So an open state cavity barrier is one that in a normal condition allows an opening in the cavity, but once heat comes near the intumescent, it swells and fills that gap, and so is meant to form that full seal I mentioned when we were looking at the approved document B picture.
Yeah. And can you just confirm these cavity barriers here, they're made of mineral wool, is that right?
Yes, as I understand it.
And
yes.
they'd be non-combustible, is that correct?
They're non-combustible.
I think that's what you say at 8.9.33
yes. No,
of
they
your
are.
report.
Yes, sorry, okay, yes they are. Yeah.
So they'd be A1, would they be A1 if they're non-combustible?
They would be, yeah.
And you go on in your report to note, this is paragraphs 11.2112 and 11.2114, that the use of cavity barriers is potentially problematic with a rain screen cladding system formed with an aluminium composite panel. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not potentially problematic, it is entirely problematic.
Let's look at your figures. I want to take you through figures 10.17 to 10.19. Can we start with 10.17?
So hold on, just slow down there, please.
Sorry.
I just want to open up 10. So 10 point what?
10.17, it's on page 19 of chapter 10.
Yeah.
So this is a first of a sequence of figures that we have in your report.
Yeah.
which is explaining, I think, the point you've just made about why they are problematic in a rain screen system.
Yeah.
Can you just talk us through?
So I just want to, again, it's about going back to that diagram in approved document B, and the wall is meant to adequately resist the spread of fire, and the cavity barrier is sealing that gap in the wall. So the cavity barrier is there to, when the flame goes into the cavity, it's stopping the flame from exiting one compartment to the next, if you will. Okay? A cavity barrier cannot stop a flame in a cavity if the wall itself is burning. So the very founding principle is that the wall is not burning and the cavity barrier is stopping a flame in the cavity. The cavity barrier cannot stop the whole wall from burning in that position.
If we go to the next figure, 10.18, I think that's over the page. Here, I think the point you're trying to make is about you could have fire spread through the combustible panel itself. Is that correct?
Yeah.
You're showing that with the red dotted line through the panel.
Yeah, so here the cavity barrier, it's beside an edge of a wall that it itself can burn. So the flame front just can quite simply pass by it.
Yeah. And then figure 10.19, which is on the same page, just at the bottom.
Yeah.
There, I think the point you're making here is that potentially you get distortion of the panels. Is that right? Do you want to just talk us through?
Yeah, exactly. So because the panel is a lightweight structure, rather than say a classic masonry wall, they can distort and produce a bigger gap, which the intumescent would then need to fill. But I think that's a secondary issue compared to the primary issue of putting a cavity barrier in a rain screen cladding system, which is quite simply the wall itself is burning, and so the cavity barrier, it cannot seal the cavity because in a way there is no cavity because the wall is burning.
And this distortion, delamination, debonding that you're talking about, do you think that there'd be any difference if the cavity barriers had been placed at the base of the spandrel panels as opposed to where they were, which is kind of part way up?
I think it makes no difference whatsoever where the cavity barriers at Grenfell Tower were, because they were put in a rain screen cladding system formed of a polymeric core.
Yeah. Professor Bisbee, at paragraph 887 of his report, says horizontal cavity barriers are considered important within rain screen cladding systems, particularly when combustible cladding insulation products are used. Would you agree with that statement?
When combustible insulation products are used?
That's what's said.
I've no idea why he said that.
Professor Torero drew a distinction between what's going on in the cavity and what's going on outside, and said potentially they might slow the spread of smoke or fire. Again.
Oh, I don't know. How could they do that? If the cavity barrier is jammed into a combustible piece of insulation on the right-hand side and a polymeric, a burning polymeric flame front on the left-hand side, I don't know what that cavity barrier can do in that context. Cavity barriers are very effective in a wall that isn't burning on both sides.
What about, would it have been possible to penetrate the rain screen system with cavity barriers at levels? Have you ever seen that done before? I
haven't, but the principle of trying to have some kind of break in the panel, I think, is probably what they mean. I don't think that's not a mitigation measure that can mitigate the flame front that can be created from a polymeric rain screen panel.
Yeah.
And I suppose that even if you could fit a barrier that ran from, in this case, the concrete outer surface of the building right through
Yes.
the rain screen panel.
Yes.
It wouldn't do much good if the panels below were
Exactly.
heavily alight. It would simply bypass
Yeah.
it.
So then you're getting into problems of what is it installed, how, what, you know, if the panel falls away, if the panel's burning. And also remember,
You get heat
you
flux up.
still have flame, you're going to have heat, you know, you're going to reach a point where you need some kind of big, kind of horizontal screen or something to try and stop the flame from getting from one floor to the next. So I think it's entirely impossible, actually. Yeah.
Just a few more questions on this. What about downwards flame spread? Do you think cavity barriers have any role there, or is...
Do you mean trying to stop the flame front on the...
Yeah, or stop melting and dripping material? Is I mean,
Oh.
is that...
Well, it might, you know, if they were very well fitted and sealed, you might get a little pool of melted polyethylene on them, but...
Yeah.
You know, I just those I consider they're all what I call little details.
Yeah.
That the flame front is roaring past. That's what happened at Grenfell.
Yeah. What about using concrete upstands to butt the cavity barriers up against?
So where would the concrete upstand be?
Yeah, I mean, I think at intervals
If someone
is what's being
to
suggested.
answer that question, if I don't know who wants to know that, if there was a sketch,
Yeah.
I'm happy to.
Yeah.
I don't know where the concrete
No,
upstand would be
understood.
and where the cavity barrier would be fixed.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to answer that of a sketch. Someone
Yeah.
gives me a sketch. Yeah.
Now, in any event, putting aside those areas, you've explained in your report that you have some concerns about the way in which the side-rise cavity barriers were installed at Grenfell Tower. Is that correct?
Yeah, and you know, again, I mean, my job is to point things out. So just to be absolutely clear, when I'm doing my own work, we always categorise defects as, you know, major or minor, primary or secondary. So I think the installation quality of the side-rise cavity barriers is a defect, but I would classify that as a minor defect
Yeah.
if, you know, if it was another building.
Actually, sorry, just before we get to those defects, what I meant to say actually before we get to that is that you've noted that the horizontal cavity barrier product that was used at Grenfell Tower was only tested as fixed between concrete panels on either side.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And for the vertical product, it was only tested between lightweight aerated concrete wall, not in a rain screen cladding
Exactly.
system.
I haven't been given evidence of the side-rise cavity barriers with a standard polyethylene cord rain screen. No.
system.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. And while I just drew the distinction there between horizontal and vertical.
Yeah.
And a vertical cavity barrier, is that normally with an intumescent, or is that more of a block?
Well, at Grenfell Tower, they were specified as being that full seal I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So it should have been from the concrete flush tight up against the external surface.
Going to I know you've said it's a minor issue, but I just want to summarise the issues you've raised about the installation. So you've said that they were, in your view, not fitted in accordance with the manufacturer's specification. And I'll just run through the key points. You say they were rough cut with gaps between barriers and the external wall.
Yes.
Not tightly abutted and with cladding rails cut through the barriers.
Yes.
I think we've seen photographs of that, so I'm not going to take you to that again. You've noted the lack of any cavity barriers in the nose of the column, in the tip of the column.
Yes.
Is that correct? Can you give a view, I mean, how common you think these issues were across the cavity barriers based on your inspections?
Yeah, so it seemed to have been very consistent, I have to say. I did get the chance to go out onto the scaffolding and I observed the panels being removed in various places, the rain screen panels being removed. So in general, I saw that the cavity barriers in the columns were particularly uneven and, I was going to say, kind of jimmied in, whereas the horizontal cavity barrier was better fitted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you've also found that horizontal cavity barriers had been used in the vertical position, is that correct?
Yeah, so whoever installed the cavity barriers in the columns seemed to just take the product that was specified for the horizontal condition and just turn it around, cut it and shove it in behind the ACP.
And you also say that cavity barriers were absent at the head of the rain screen cladding system,
Yeah,
at the top of the building.
yeah. So they don't appear to have been specified on the drawings.
Yeah.
I did not get to go up and look, and anyway, actually, there's nothing to see there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think you emphasised earlier that approved document B does
Absolutely.
suggest, if you're following that guidance, that they should be there at the head.
Yeah, you have to seal the wall on the final floor. Yeah. Oh, sorry, the top of the final floor, excuse me. Yeah.
Although the logical question follows, do you think that the presence of cavity barriers at the top of the building, before you get to the crown, could have made any meaningful difference in terms of fire spread at Grenfell Tower?
Not at Grenfell Tower, no.
Now, you've also noted in your latest report that at the time of construction of Grenfell Tower, the manufacturer's instructions for the type of cavity barrier that were used, i.e. Siderise RH25 with the green strip on the top, didn't state that they should be installed with that green logo tape at the top. Is that correct?
For the product with the smaller gap 25, yes, that's correct. Yeah,
Yes.
I had thought it was for any product.
Yes.
But then it was only for the open stay cavity barriers that are tested for adequate performance with the larger 50mm gap.
Yes. Do you understand why one product should be installed in one orientation and not the other?
No, I don't, and not particularly since I've read all the Siderise fire test reports.
What is it about those fire test reports?
Because in all the test reports it says the intumescent is 75mm deep. So I don't understand when you have cavity barriers that are deeper than 75mm, I don't understand why it doesn't matter where the intumescent is.
And is that something you want to explore in more detail at phase 2?
I mean, yes, I will look into it, but again, everything about this product are they're what I call minor defects in the context of Grenfell because of the overall wall it was fitted into. In other buildings with a masonry wall or whatever, those smaller details in the context of Grenfell are then very important.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's important to note, I think, that whilst you said in your first report that the barriers were upside down and that was a non-compliance, you're not saying that's a non-compliance in your revised report.
I'm using more neutral language.
And then
but I remain technically entirely unclear why it doesn't matter.
I see. And then finally, as we discussed earlier, you found no cavity barriers around any of the windows.
No, I did not.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a good moment for a break, because I'm moving to a different topic.
Yes.
Yeah.
How are you getting on?
Yes, good.
Well, should we have 5 minutes or 10 is really what I'm asking you.
I think let's have 10.
Oh,
Is that right,
that
Fran?
sounds great, yeah.
Doesn't sound
Okay.
Good. Well, we'll have a 10-minute break then.
Okay, great,
Please
thank
don't
you.
talk to anyone about your evidence. And
Yep.
back at 2:45 then.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Quarter to 3 then, please.
Can you take your seats, please, and remain silent? Thank you.
All right, Dr. Lane?
Yeah.
Good.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, that's great.
If I can just start by giving a trigger warning. In about 3 or 4 minutes, we're going to come to look at the escape of the flat out of the escape of the fire out of flat 16 and the issues around that. And I know Dr. Lane was keen to be able to look at Professor Bisbee's video.
Yes.
So we're going to watch a portion of that again, I'm afraid. So I'll give the trigger warning again when we get to it.
Thank you. Yeah.
But I'm warning people now that we're just a few minutes away from that if they wish to leave, and that will involve scenes of the tower on fire, which some may find distressing. Before I come to that new topic, I just have 2 follow-up questions from the issues we were just discussing. First of all, a number of residents in their evidence have referred to the fact that after the refurbishment they felt that there were drafts around the windows that they could really feel. Do you have any insight into what might have been the source of those drafts? Is that something you've thought about?
So, as a fire safety engineer, it's, I don't think about drafts, but what I would say, sorry, I think it's really important to just remember that detailing under the UPVC. So my interest in it is what's under the UPVC. And I've told you, several times today about those voids. So one can imagine, you can translate from there then to sizable voids and loose materials. Yeah. But it would be, it's better for an architect or an appropriate person to give a proper view. Yeah.
And then just one point of detail and clarification about your diagram 10.18. This is on page 20 of chapter 10. That's BLAS 5010.
Sorry, 10.18?
Yes, it's figure, 10.18 at the top of page 20. Yep. We were looking at that earlier in the context of cavity barriers, and here you have this diagram of the fire spreading through the combustible polyethylene core of the rain screen cladding panel. I've been asked to get you to clarify, so far as you're aware, could the aluminium skins stay in place and the PE burn up the middle of the panel, or would the aluminium have to delaminate somewhat in order for that to happen? Yeah, I mean, can you literally get fire spread inside the panel with the 2 pieces of aluminium?
Okay,
still
so
in
then
place?
that the cavity barrier could work perfectly well with the remaining aluminium?
No, I don't think that's what's being suggested. I think it's just to clarify, when it's circumventing, can it circumvent the cavity barrier by literally going right up the middle?
Oh, right.
Or will you always get or need to have, for oxygen purposes, some kind of delamination, debonding of the aluminium?
So I suppose it depends on what the flame situation is in that location at that time, isn't it? So if it's at the start of something, it might just be the core. But when you have that very well established flame front on a column, I think there is more than just the core changing going on. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm now going to turn to a different topic, which is to effectively go back to the sequence of events at Grenfell Tower and to summarise your evidence by reference to the sequence of events in the early stages.
Yeah.
I'm then going to want to explore with you on Monday, when your evidence continues, the active and passive fire safety systems inside the tower in more detail. And we'll start with doors on Monday.
Yeah.
So first, I want to consider the route of fire spread out of flat 16.
Yeah.
You've heard both Professor Torero and Professor Bisbee being questioned about this. And in your report, you address this at 10.3.7, where you say you think the most probable escape route was the higher portion of the kitchen flat window through the column side jamb and head of the window. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And does that remain your position?
Yes, it does.
Now, at this point, is it appropriate to watch the video of Professor Bisbee before we come on to some more detail?
Do you want me to explain my
conclusion? So I think it's possible for us to, we did it yesterday, stop the video if you want to at particular parts, or we can just watch it all the way through.
Well, I think if we're talking about the fire coming out at the top and the side of the window, so anything, say, from about 106 onwards would be fine. Just a few minutes, and then I can just maybe do some talking. Yeah,
that's fine. Can we do that? So just before we play this, I'm going to give the trigger warning one more time. So we are about to play a video of the fire spread out of the kitchen window and up the east face. If anyone wants to stop watching or leave the room now.
Right.
Yes. Sorry, I think that's 108. Can we take it back to 106?
Yeah, maybe 106. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Stinks. Murky. It's got the ends.
Maybe if we stop there. Be good to stop there. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So again, it's about going back to this drawing at 8:11, and so when you look at this image here, so you can see some flame. It's still internal. You can see glowing from inside the room. And we also know from the thermal imaging from from London Fire Brigade, the kind of the general area of the heat source. And all of that is going on beside this, near the UPVC on the side of the window, the UPVC at the top of the window, and this complex gap I've been referring to, which can be anything from 30 to 130 millimetres.
Yeah.
And
do you want to pull up that drawing? I think we can split the screen.
Oh,
can we do that with a
Yeah.
video? I may be asking too much. The drawing is at BLAS 608, page 13. And it's that right-hand drawing, that's it, the far right drawing. If we zoom in on the far right-hand figure.
That's fine. Yeah, so that's fine. So you've heard an awful lot in the last few days about how UPVC behaves in relatively low temperatures, and I'm not talking about when it's ignited or anything like that. And we've had a discussion that it was glued on. It wasn't mechanically fixed to the window area either. So in my mind, it's a localized, fire, but in that localized area, relatively speaking, it's a substantial fire near that corner of the window before it gets out. But what we can't see is there is now heat transfer through that corner, okay? Through this corner, sorry, I'll stand up here. You have some kind of fire condition here, you have heat transfer in through this corner, which may be 35, it may be 3 or 4 times larger than that. And so by the time we see the flames on the exterior, so out the glass, to put it bluntly, we've had that localized heating condition going on in that corner for several minutes. And I think that it's more probable, therefore, that the heat transfer and the fire condition there has entered the column cavity, within minutes of the first minute we see the flame on the outside.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't think it happens later. I think it's been going on. The conditions have been, if you will, the materials, everything's been getting ready, and after a few minutes, the heat is transferring into that cavity all along.
So just to be clear about the mechanism, the UPVC is potentially melted, deformed.
UPVC may have fallen away, might be distorting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we've got the insulation behind that.
Yeah, we have a little piece of insulation glued onto the back of it. And then after that, then it's fresh air and the membrane into the cavity in the column.
Yeah. So the EDPM membrane, and then you're straight into the insulation.
You're straight into the cavity in the column and heating any material in behind the panel there. So the panel itself and the insulation. Okay. Do
you want to carry on watching the video?
Well, I don't know what your next question is.
No, it's just in terms of...
Sorry. I don't need to know. I'm fine for now. But if you're going to ask me something else, So
is there anything else in that video sequence that you want to draw attention to?
Well, I think I was struck by some of the evidence about this issue of breaching of the compartment, but I don't know if I should talk about that now or not.
Feel free. I mean, I'm trying to get you to explain why it is that you think that's the likely route out of flat 16. If you want to express a view on the other theory that we were discussing, which is kind of through an open window, possibly through the extract panel window.
Right. Okay.
Is that what you were just talking about?
So I can see that the flame reaches the glass in the extractor fan and then becomes an external flame. Yeah. But I think in the time period it's taking for us to finally see that, this internal heating is going on in that corner, in this complex corner that we have, okay? In terms of breaching the compartment, I thought it was, just having listened to everybody for the last few days.
I'm coming to that in a minute. Can we hold off on those questions?
So that's all. But in my mind, I think the most dominant, the most probable first route is through that the connection on the corner of the column.
That's helpful. I think one of the things you refer to in your report is the thermal imaging from within flat 16.
Yeah,
is that
just
right?
It shows the location of the heating.
Shall we go to that? That's figure 9.38.
Yeah.
BLAS 609 at page 45. And it's that thermal imaging. Well, actually, sorry, let's keep this diagram, the page as it is, because I think...
Yeah, so
you've drawn attention to this in your report.
Yeah, so I wanted to try and... I mean, I'm only interested in the thermal imaging for a kind of a general location.
Yeah.
But when you think about that, you know, overlaid on the construction, that's what interests me. And in this picture, you know, the UPVC beside the column is removed. But you can see that the area, that concentrated area from whatever's happening in the kitchen is all over by that corner of the column with the window. And I'm clear in my own mind how easy it is for heat to transfer through that connection, you know, through that detailing into the cavity. That's the point I'm making there.
Yeah, and I think as a fact, you say that you think the fire was already in the cladding certainly by 108, is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. I think by the time we see that external flame front,
Yeah.
there has been a lot going on for the 10, even longer minutes. You know, that's in fire sense 10 or so minutes, and that type of heating with those materials in a localised sense is a substantial event. It's a localised event, yeah.
Yeah, and you, for that 108 time, I think you referred, let's just look at this photograph, which is a still.
Yeah.
That's IWS 6051. Sorry, if it's easier, it's in yes, I think that's the photograph that you've referred to in your report for the 108 timing.
Can you just tell me where you are?
Sorry, I should have done it taking you to it in your report. That's at BLAS 605, page 10.
Of what chapter?
So it's chapter 5,
yeah,
page 10. Yeah. Big one.
So figure 5.5.
Yeah, it's figure 5.5. I think that's the same as the photo we just had. Sorry, this is clearer actually because you've put the lines on it.
Yeah.
So it's that photograph that you're now highlighting in terms of external flaming outside the window at 108. Is that correct?
Yes,
you say
that's
this
correct.
is the earliest evidence I've seen of external flaming based on the photographs and videos
That's correct.
I've reviewed to date.
Yeah.
And does it remain your view that once the fire's near the window, or indeed anywhere in the flat, if allowed to develop and cause heating of the window components, that spread to the exterior is practically inevitable?
If the fire isn't interfered with, yes. Yeah.
And is it also your view that once the fire was within the cladding, there was nothing to impede the spread of fire and smoke around the building?
That's correct.
And you say this created the conditions for a catastrophic fire event to occur?
Yes, I did, yeah.
I now want to turn to the topic you were just touching on, which is about breach of compartmentation.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And I want to ask you when you think the breach of compartmentation occurs.
Yeah.
At what moment?
Yeah. Could I use that figure in approved document B actually, please, where we've been looking at the cavity barriers all the time?
Yes. So,
because I just want to explain the kind of statutory perspective on a compartment breach. I just wanted to introduce that, having heard the other experts.
Yeah, we'll just find that. So it's BLAS 5011, page 69, which is figure 11.22 of your report, I think.
Yeah, okay.
Is it that
so
diagram?
just to use this again, yeah. Okay, so it isn't assumed that the fire is kept within the compartment, and once it passes, say, a millimetre line, the compartment is breached. And so first of all, to think about the cavity. So it is assumed fire can enter a cavity, but then that it's contained from spreading to a cavity in the next apartment. And if you look at this, in this condition here, if the fire is in this room, between this room at this level and the room at the next level above, you have to break 1 and 2 cavity barriers before the flame is in the next compartment, and 3 cavity barriers, if you will, before you interfere with the next window. So the fact that the flame is in the cavity in flat 16, it is not a compartment breach at that time. It becomes a compartment breach in the cavity only when it reaches the next flat above or below. And it's the same with external flame projection. It is taken account for that flames may break a window and project. And that's exactly why the external surface is meant to adequately resist the spread of fire, because it's assumed that that will occur. It's just then it cannot cause a fire in the next apartment. And they're two very distinct things that are factored in, that you can have the fire, it can break into the cavity, it can break out the window, but the principle is it then does not go on to burn the next compartment. So the first sign of flame out the tower is not compartmentation breach, as I understand the statutory guidance.
Yes. So it follows from that answer that you think that compartmentation is breached.
Yes.
When we've got fire up at the next level.
Exactly. Once it goes
impinging on the compartment above.
Exactly.
And do you have a view? I mean, you say in your report that internal compartmentation had started to fail by 113.
Yes.
Would you put 113 at the point when?
Yeah. So at around 113, you can see the flames above the compartment floor line at level 5. And by the time it gets to 115, did I say 113 there? Sorry.
I think you said 113.
I should have said 113. Within 120 seconds, you can actually see the flame flashing underneath the cladding on the column at level 5. So now that is compartmentation breach.
So we've got compartmentation breach at that
By
point.
then,
By
yes.
then.
Yeah.
And do you think that was visible then at Grenfell Tower, based on the video evidence you've seen, that there was compartmentation breach by 113, 115?
Do you mean visible to firefighters?
Watching, yeah. Do you
Okay.
think that was visible?
Well, so you'll note that I haven't said the building failed at 113, 115, because even when the flames start to impinge on level 5, in the moment, it's still, I kind of feel bad even saying this in the context of what actually happened, but it's still a small fire in one small part of flat 16 and the flat above. So in that moment, there's no reason to think it's going to it's necessarily going to carry on, okay, in those moments, okay? And it's the same when it gets to 6 and 7. And I'm interested in all the other levels, because ideally, using a handheld hose up to about level 7, it's still a fire that can be mitigated potentially. And even when it gets up to a level 11, it's still a localized fire. Yes, it's on multiple floors, but it's in a localized area of the building. It's still within reach of maybe an aerial appliance. And the reason why I went on to, I've thought about it for a very long time, to pick the time of 126 for building failure rather than 115 is because at that point, it's very clearly visible that the flame front is now what I would call unstoppable. Okay, so in those first few stories, it's still in a small part of those compartments and within reach. Okay,
But can I just clarify?
that's just my opinion. Yeah.
No, that's right. I mean, I understand the proposition that the building did not actually fail in one sense until the fire had progressed from floor 4 up a number of floors.
Exactly.
But I think I understood you to say that once the fire had got out of flat 4 into the cavity,
Yes.
there was nothing to stop it after that.
Yes, that's correct.
So in one sense, the
Yes.
building had failed as soon as the fire got into the cavity, had
Yeah.
it not?
So in hindsight, we know that.
Yes.
Okay, don't we?
It's a
But
matter of
in the, I
perspective.
keep using this in the moment. So
Yeah.
there is no reason in the moment to think that external flame projection or even a fire in the
Right.
cavity at level 4 can carry on. And that's why I use the word catastrophic.
Yeah,
Okay.
but so in a sense, I think, I hope I'm right in understanding this, it's a matter of perception or recognition. So once it had got into the cavity at floor 4,
Yeah.
the ensuing series of events was bound to happen. But you wouldn't know that until it had developed quite a lot further.
Exactly.
Is that
I
right?
think it's I suppose if I can say it this way, I think it's unreasonable to expect back then. Now is obviously very different, okay? But back then, I think it would be unreasonable for me to say now, everyone should have known the minute the flame was in the cavity at level 4, we all knew what was going to happen. I think that would be very unreasonable for me to say. And I still think just within a few stories, it was an event that maybe could have been mitigated.
If you had known the nature of the materials in the cladding, both the insulation and the rain screen, would that affect your view of what you would have inferred from seeing the fire breaking out of floor 4?
Well, I'd go actually even further than that. I think that if those materials had been known, okay, the building shouldn't have been occupied, because the fire brigade would have then also known what was facing them.
Yeah.
Okay, and so now we're kind of mixing all the time now hindsight and in the moment. So as far as I'm concerned, in the beginning it was a localized fire. It breached the first compartment around 1:13, 1:15. It was still a fire that could be mitigated, but above a certain level it became a fire that could not be mitigated and was clearly not going to stop, because it couldn't stop because of the construction materials that existed all around the building.
Yeah, well, that's very helpful.
That's just my view.
No, thank you very much.
Just linking that to the stay put policy.
Yeah.
I think you say in your report that the internal compartmentation and the principles of stay put evacuation regime had started to fail by 1:13.
Yeah.
And then you say they'd substantially failed by 1:26.
Yes.
Is that a distinction that you're still
So
drawing?
it's basically a shorter way of saying what I've just explained there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, in your report, you say, well, by 1:21, 8 flats had been impacted by the external flame
Yes.
front.
Yeah.
And by 1:26, that had risen to 20 flats. Let's just go to your figure 12.1 on page 8 of chapter 12, BLAS 5012.
In the C
Yes,
papers, I don't have that.
No, it's just a
sorry.
diagram.
Oh yeah, here I am. What figure?
Sorry, it's 12.1, I think you're referring to here, when you
Yeah.
make the point about the
Yeah.
the flats that are impinged by
Yeah.
external flame. And if we can look at the right-hand two
Yeah.
columns here, you say in your report that by 1:21, 8 flats had been impacted, and 1:26, 20 flats.
Yeah, exactly. So this is just a very simple diagram, and each flat is marked red once the flame front reaches it in any way. It's just a very just trying to show progression. Okay.
Sorry, I should have given a trigger warning before going to that. I was actually wanting also to go to the two diagrams below where you've actually tried to just map out the difference.
Yeah.
Just to test your views on stay put for a moment. So it's not your view that stay put was untenable the moment compartmentation was breached around 113?
Not in that moment, no.
What about at the point at 114 when the LFB changed their tactics and they request a hydraulic platform? Do you think that's relevant to when stay put becomes untenable, that event?
I think that's a recognition that unplanned fire, external firefighting, is becoming necessary. I think we'll probably be talking about this some more on Monday with the measures. Just a reminder that a designer only puts into a high-rise residential building equipment for internal firefighting.
Do you think it was clear at that point that defend in place had failed? This is the kind of mirror image of stay put.
Defend in place firefighting is about fighting the fire internally, using equipment the building provides for you as a firefighter, and it relies, as does stay put, that there is a flashover fire in one flat that may fire in one flat that may be impacting another floor above.
What about the ferocity and speed of attack of the fire going up that face? Do you think before 126 the speed and the ferocity perhaps should have indicated that stay put had failed?
So I think, I struggle with this bit because I think it's really easy for me to say that now because I, woke up the following morning as such, okay? But I think in those moments, and that's why I want to keep emphasising why I picked 126, in those moments and the minutes that passed, I think up till about story, I said between about story 7 and story 11, this was still a fire in a corner within reach of typical equipment. Okay? After that, there was a need for that recognition to occur then, yes.
Just on the concept of stay put, just generally, and the definition of stay put, you have said in your report that the concept of occupants in dwellings adjoining the dwelling on fire being safe if they remain where they are during a fire is the stay put strategy, and that's how you define it in your report.
Yes, that's correct.
And do you agree that the stay put strategy means you stay in one's flat until that flat becomes compromised by fire or smoke?
Yes, or you're free. It's been written in guidance certainly since 1971. I actually think it's 1962, unless you make the decision to leave anyway.
Yeah.
So the idea is you may decide to escape anyway, and it's safe to do so, or it's safe for you to stay in your flat until you're impacted by products of combustion, or you're instructed to do so.
Yeah. I've been asked to put to you, if we could just look at the LGA guide on purpose-built blocks of flats, that has a definition of stay put.
I'd need that up on the screen.
I'm bringing it up, so it's at 19.1, that's CTAR 5033 at page 30. Yeah, so if we just look at the bottom of that page, there's a definition here of stay put. So it says a stay put policy involves the following approach. When a fire occurs within a flat, the occupants alert others in the flat, make their way out of the building and summon the fire and rescue service. If a fire starts in the common part, anyone in these areas makes their way out of the building and summons the fire and rescue service. All other residents not directly affected by the fire will be expected to stay put and remain in their flat unless directed to leave by the fire and rescue service. Do you think that definition in any way differs from the way you've used stay put in your report?
Yeah, well, there's a few things strike me about this, and I just need to say now, I haven't thought about this before you put it up on the screen. So I don't know, who are the people in the common parts and how are they going to know how to make their way out? Or is people in the flats around that common part? So because remember, there's no detection, there's nothing to alert you, even if there's a fire in a common part in this country in a residential building. So I see this text from the LGA guide, I don't know who wrote it or why, but it is slightly different, I would suggest, to the statutory guidance document. I'd need to understand the context of that question to give a proper answer.
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah.
And then in terms of the last point, is there anything you want to say about that? All other residents not directly affected by the fire will be expected to stay put and remain in their flat unless directed to leave by the fire and rescue service.
Yeah, so I understand the sentence, but you know, in my own report I've explained at length that in terms of the building design condition, you know, how the fire and rescue services are expected to do that. There is no provision made for them. And also the statutory guidance is that one is always free to leave a building and one is not meant to rely at all on the fire and rescue services. That's the very the kind of foundation in B1. It makes that clear.
Yeah.
So I don't know who wants to know this, but if there's something I've missed there, they should maybe ask me another question. Yeah.
Dr. Lane, I've got really one more key topic today, and then with the Chairman's permission, I think what we might do is then break for the rest of today and begin again, because I don't want to start, the next big topics are flat doors and stair doors, and I want to be able to deal with them in one go.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. So I want to ask you a few questions about evacuation now. You have said, based on a very detailed analysis that you've done of all the evidence available to you, including evidence of the conditions in the lobbies and stairs, that you think there was a window from between 0058 and 140 when a total evacuation needed to occur. Is that correct?
Okay, so just explain what I mean by that.
Yeah.
So 0058 to 140. So what I mean by that is I don't know if we can put up the clause from the approved document B, it makes clear there's a fire in one flat, and so the probability of fire and smoke spread is low, no reliance on external rescue, and so total evacuation is highly unlikely to be necessary, I think it is. And so because a building with this form of external wall could never provide the high degree of compartmentation required to support stay put, from my perspective, at handover of that building with the external wall in the condition it was, a stay put evacuation strategy should not have formed the fire safety strategy basis of the building anymore. And the only evacuation strategy possible in that context was a total evacuation. So I'm saying that from what I call a building design condition.
Yeah.
So at handover, the high degree of compartmentation cannot be maintained. And so as the statutory guidance document says, therefore a total evacuation is highly probable to be needed, highly likely to be needed.
Yeah.
That's what I mean there.
Yeah. And I think in terms of the significance of the time 140, you basically showed in your analysis that the evacuation substantially slows at that point. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the thing I've just said there is to do with the building condition. Now, starting to look at events as they unfolded, in the graphs, I don't know if we're going to, I just feel a bit uneasy not having the graph, but I'll crack on. I have plotted the evacuation rates, okay, and you can see some clear changes through that data, and I've made very clear that was not available during the fire. That's something I can do in hindsight. And at 140, there's a considerable change. And I've explained in section 14 in my report from all the different types of witness evidence we have, how the stair and the lobbies were changing from 0058 all through the night. And we know from 140, conditions were starting to deteriorate.
You have said in your report that before the stay put guidance began to change at 2:35, 177 occupants had already evacuated. That left 117 in the building at that point. Thereafter, you've said that after 2:35, a further 46 occupants evacuated, the last leaving at 8:07. That's a pattern you've drawn attention to. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Now, I just want to ask you some general questions. We can come back to this on Monday if we need to. What do you think is potentially going on in terms of smoke, ventilation, migration to enable those evacuations at the later stages? Do you have any views as to what's
going on with the smoke?
Well, to enable those people to get out of the building.
Enable? I don't think they were enabled at all. I think that the people evacuated in life-threatening conditions.
Yeah. Do you think that simultaneous evacuation was fundamentally inconsistent with firefighting operations that were going on at the time in the building?
No, I do not.
And one of the things
because things get taken out of context.
Yeah.
So I think that the stair capacity and the relatively low occupancy of a building using a single staircase, that is possible.
Yeah.
But I just have to keep reminding everyone all the time, buildings designed this way have no means to raise an alarm to tell people to leave. And trying to, so it just sounds very trite of me to simply just say it wouldn't have impacted the firefighters. There was room on the stairs for everyone, but that's only the start of the story, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a key thing I wanted to take you to, actually, is what you've done in your report, based on your perspective, is look at the width of the stair and the guidance that's given in approved document B. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's a very simple capacity check, okay, that designers use. And what you've said is a stair of this width and height is deemed to provide an escape capacity for simultaneous evacuation of 1,030 people. That's what the guidance suggests. Yes, in a very simple way, yes. So that's able, ignoring all the realities of an evacuation. Yeah.
And you've also said that even if we assume a 50% capacity of the stair, that's going to be around 515 persons.
Yes.
And you say that that's substantially higher than the peak number of firefighters and persons in the tower, which is 321 persons, which I think is 294 residents and 27 firefighters.
Yes.
Is that correct? And is it right that that's broadly consistent with Professor Purser's analysis? He, from a different perspective, has calculated that the maximum standing capacity in the staircase was 460 persons.
Yes.
And then he gives his views about simultaneous evacuations.
So they're very simple capacity checks.
Yes.
When you're doing what I call a detailed proper evacuation analysis, there's all different timings have to be factored in. How long it takes people to move, we have to remember, even though the statutory guidance makes no provision currently, of all the people who find it very difficult or impossible to use a staircase. So I think in phase 2 there will be what I would call a very robust evacuation analysis done, and that it will factor in all those realities. These are simple capacity checks to show the kind of the capacity of the staircase area.
Yeah.
So I don't think, based on the stair width, it was a primary problem. Okay,
Yeah.
it's what was happening on the staircase in terms of smoke and heat and other things is the dominant parameter.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah. So just finally to round up here, you conclude that the required single safety condition, stay put, was not provided for as was required as a result of the rain screen system installed during the primary refurbishment. Is
That's
that
correct.
And you say that Grenfell Tower should never have been handed over with this rain screen system in circumstances where a stay put strategy was in place. Is that
That's
correct? Does that opinion assume that all other active and passive measures in the tower were fully functional and in working order?
I don't think it's possible, with the external wall construction that there was, to mitigate the type of fire that those materials cause. And that's a whole combination of active and passive fire protection measures and their condition. I don't think it's possible to mitigate that type of fire, which is why I said the building should not have been handed over in that condition.
Dr. Lane, I think that is a good moment for me in my
Yes.
questions, if that's okay to finish early
Yes.
today, because I want to then go to some of the active and passive measures inside the building.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Well, now, Dr. Lane, I understand you've been good enough to say you'd come back on Monday,
Oh yeah, no, very happy to. Yeah.
and I think it is going to be of help to everyone if we deal with the next topic in an unbroken way.
Okay.
So we will stop for now for today.
Yeah.
Perhaps you'll be quite pleased anyway, 'cause
Yeah.
it's been quite a long day
yeah.
for you, I know.
Yeah.
And we'll resume at 10 o'clock on Monday with your
Okay.
evidence. I'm going to ask you not to talk about your evidence over the
That's fine.
over the break, if that's all right.
Yeah.
And we'll look forward to seeing you on Monday morning,
Okay.
10
Thank
o'clock.
you.
Is that
Thank
right?
you. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Do I clean my desk?
Shall we clear it? We'll clear it for you, don't worry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll do that in a moment.
Thank you. Thanks for.
Thank you very much. Well, that's all for today. Just to remind you that we shall be sitting tomorrow to take some further evidence from firefighter witnesses, in particular control room officers. But and that'll be at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. But for the time being, that's it. Yes? Thank you very much. 10 o'clock tomorrow. Thank you.